What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show today. It is Wednesday, May 18th, 2016, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Powhatan on a Friday. And another relaxing weekend. We have got lots and lots of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Couple of quick program notes. We've got a whole bunch of guests coming on up. We've got Alan Favish coming up next week. Dave Martin about the Vince Foster is going to be on May 24th. On May 25th, Walter Brash, expert on fracking and the harm it causes, is going to be our guest. Wednesday, June 1st, Helen Davis Chapman about how J.P. Morgan was tangled up in this whole Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme. So we got a lot of interesting guests coming on up there. Now then, obviously the big news, yesterday there were primaries for the Democrats in Kentucky and Oregon. Sanders won Oregon. For all intents and purposes, it was a tie in Kentucky. Hillary is claiming victory on the basis of half a percentage point of the vote count. But they split the delegates evenly. So for all intents and purposes, it's a tie. And there's a lot of suspicion about Hillary's sudden surge at the end, where she could say, we have broken Bernie Sanders' momentum. They hardly did that, and I got a ton of emails from people who were watching the results coming in who saw Bernie Sanders' vote totals drop, and somebody actually got it on video. So, yeah, they're still playing the games, and, of course, Hillary's supporters are already over the corporate media saying there's no fraud going on. America's elections are 100% honest and fair and accurate. Just because we can't audit them and double-check it is no reason to suspect. And, of course, they're going on the offensive against the Sanders campaign, because a lot of people are very, very upset over the obvious machinations being used to shove Hillary down our throats. And so the spin coming on out now is, well, okay, yeah, the rules are obviously favoring Hillary Clinton, and the head of the DNC wants it to be Hillary, but really, this is the rules. These are the rules we made up, and really, Bernie Sanders and their supporters are just being poor sports to not go along with our program. And they're trying to find press all these charges and try and claim that it's Bernie Sanders people who are the cause of the problem. No, it isn't. The Sanders people are responding to the very obvious attempts to hijack the nominating process and install a candidate not of their choosing, and I can understand why they're being upset. And remember what John F. Kennedy said about those who make peaceful revolution impossible, make violent revolution inevitable, and I'm not encouraging that. I would like to avoid a revolution in this country, but I can see why so many people seem to think one is coming in. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Jim in Illinois, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. My question is I'm wondering about the government right now and how they're bringing in the people from the Middle East. They're ramrodding them through our country.
Yes.
And then I'm wondering why they're going to attack our sector. They're going to bring socio and psychopaths from another country, and then they're going to try to take our guns away. And I'm wondering how does that work out, and why aren't the people in our country demanding an answer to that?
Well, we are demanding answers. The government is simply ignoring us with as much dignity as they can muster. Now, if there's anybody out there who thinks that all these illegal immigrants and these refugees are going to form a new army for the federal government, they are seriously delusional, because these are all people with no emotional connection to this country. If they throw them in uniforms and drop them into the next war zone, these people are just going to drop down and hide. They're not motivated fighters to fight on behalf of the U.S. government. The same thing with trying to muster them as an army against the indigenous population. It's simply not going to work. I mean, the last ruler who tried that was King Charles I, and he was beheaded for it. So it's an absolutely ridiculous idea, but we've seen so many poorly thought out, brain-dead ideas come out of Washington, D.C.
It's bothering me, though, because they're like Hillary Clinton is just really pushing. I mean, she has got to have some big plans for her to be against guns the way she is.
Well,
there'd be no reason, because, like, I live on a block, okay? I live in Illinois. I live in a rural part of Illinois. We all have guns.
Yes.
Okay? No, there's never been a shooting ever.
Yes.
But in Chicago, there is. So what they do is they jam that in the news about, well, these people are going to get guns no matter what. They are getting them illegally. I don't know how they're getting them.
Oh, they can get them from Fast and Furious.
They're using that.
Yeah.
They're using the people getting them illegally to come after the people who just want to be left alone.
Oh, they've always done that. They understand. Law-abiding gun owners don't present a case for gun confiscation. They have to have gun crime in the streets. And by the way, we're always hearing about America's out-of-control gun violence, but the reality is that it's all concentrated in a few of these cities that are under Democratic control that already have strict gun laws. If you take that gun violence out of the equation, the United States is actually quite peaceful. It's something like fourth from the bottom of all industrialized nations in terms of gun violence. All the gun violence is happening in these Democratic strongholds like Chicago.
Right. Hey, Mike, thanks a lot for everything, man. I love your show, and I PayPal you, so...
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
You keep doing what you're doing, man. Thank you very much.
As long as I can, and thank you very much for the phone call, and thank you very much for the support, because every little bit helps here, especially in this salt air climate. All of this machinery is dissolving, corroding away here. All right, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Now, following his win up in Oregon, and Sanders won by quite a margin, certainly a much larger margin than the 0.5 percentage point that Hillary is waving around to claim that she conquered Kentucky. And Sanders is saying he is going to stay in the campaign until the last ballot is cast, and he's resisting all this pressure coming from Hillary supporters, the DNC, and everybody else to just get out of the way of Hillary Clinton. She's going to be the nominee. What do you not understand about it? We have decided it's not up to the people. Blah, 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 blah. So, again, we have a link to this video where somebody was actually recording the Kentucky results coming in, and they captured 5,000 votes for Bernie Sanders vanished from the count live on CNN. And that 5,000 votes would have made Bernie Sanders the winner in Kentucky, again by just a small percentage point, and again they would split the delegates. But Hillary's out there trying to prove she's on a comeback. And she's not. She and her people are still cheating. Hillary wants that White House. She will do anything to get it. And there's the warning sign. Because if she's willing to do anything to get the Oval Office, she's going to be willing to do anything with it once she gets it. I imagine she'll be annoyed at having to sit at the same desk where her husband was getting Hummers from Monica Lewinsky, but I'm sure she'll deal with that. So anyway, we have this article, again, a YouTube video. The Nevada Democratic Party commits outright election fraud and files a smear complaint against Sanders. It's blaming the victim. We're going to steal the election. How dare you complain? We're going to go after you for daring to complain about how we're stealing the election. That's how open this absolutely is here. Another article, Blacklisted News, how the Democrats manipulated the Nevada State Party convention and then blame Bernie Sanders for the chaos. How dare you get upset over our stealing the nomination? You're not supposed to do that. So we're seeing all these other articles where the Democrats are out there saying Bernie Sanders is going to wreck it for everybody. That there's a Sanders revolt. All those people supporting Bernie Sanders, they're rebels. They're rebelling against us. Yeah, in a very real way. And they're out there saying that Sanders is just going to upset everything. Sanders represents the will of the people. If it weren't for those bought and paid for superdelegates, this would be a horse race. They're that close together. Hillary's grasp on the nomination right now is more and more dependent on those superdelegates who were literally bought with donations to the state Democratic parties. And there's something that the Democrats ought to be thinking about very, very carefully as they look at this anger, and then they enrage the Sanders supporters by saying it's all your fault because you're not supposed to complain about what we're doing. Do you think any of those Bernie Sanders supporters are going to vote for Hillary in November? No. They're going to go across and they're going to vote for Donald Trump. And that is something the polling is not showing when they're pairing Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton They're not factoring in all of the enraged Bernie Sanders supporters who will vote for Donald Trump just to spite Hillary for refusing to accede to the will of the people. All right, we're going to grab a phone call. Alex in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, I just wanted to let you know the system is set up from the get-go, even if it was completely honest counting of the votes, it's set up to be rigged. None of Bernie Sanders voters who are mostly independent, like me, can vote in the major primaries. If it was where independents and Democrats could vote in the primaries, the race would have been over a long time ago.
Well, you know, Bernie Sanders has put out the message. If you're supporting Bernie Sanders, you have to register as a Democrat unless you're in a state that allows you to register as no party affiliation, and then basically you get the whole slate of candidates in front of you. Where they're playing dirty tricks is like out in California, where if you check independent, that doesn't mean the same thing as no party affiliation. That signs you onto the American Independent Party, and you get a bunch of names that you won't even recognize on the ballot. And the system is set up to protect the two-party system. It's set up to block third parties from getting on in. You need to understand this election is not about Republican versus Democrat. It's not about conservative versus liberal. It's all about the insiders versus the outsiders, and the insiders, Republican and Democrat, are circling the wagons because they don't dare let an outsider in, because it's going to wreck the party. It's going to wreck the unending flow of money and power and underage children that are just pouring into the laps of all the insiders.
You got that right. So it's basically no Bernie Sanders at whatever cost it is. We do not care if we disenfranchise freaking 90% of the youth. It does not matter to them.
No, it doesn't. You know, in Nevada, we saw Bernie Sanders supporters' registration was changed without their permission and knowledge. Bernie Sanders supporters' registrations have vanished completely up in New Jersey. I mean, they're not even trying to hide the fact. They're going to shove Hillary Clinton down our throats. And I don't know about you. I refuse to acknowledge the legitimacy of a government not of the choosing of the people.
You got that right. I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. It is disgusting. And one thing Bernie Sanders has said, and it needs to be looked at, it is a crime to be this general of overthrowing Libya and other countries and just killing people with no regard to life. And that's Hillary Clinton.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is.
Of all these overthrows, and I'm sure she'll tell her generals to go ahead and bomb everybody in that area because they're
and then she'll cackle about it afterwards. She thinks it's great fun. Anyway, listen, we got a bunch of callers coming on in here right now, so thank you very much for the phone call, Alex. We're going to switch to Steve in Massachusetts. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. Just to talk about the transgender issue. First, when I heard about the election, how close it was yesterday, I just knew it was going to go to Hillary, only because, that's what they do. They rig it when it's that close.
Well, they weren't able to rig it enough because they're splitting the delegates evenly. So in terms of the general election, it was a tie. And Hillary can go on out and say, we have stopped the Sanders juggernaut and I am victorious. No, it was a tie.
Right. And to the transgender issue.
Yeah.
It's the whole thing's just silly. First of all,
of course it's silly.
How many transgender people are there really? I mean, I don't think I've ever even seen one in my life. And to make it such a big issue, they make it sound like there's millions and millions of transgenders out there, which is, it's ridiculous.
Well, I mean, sometimes it's hard to spot them. I mean, I'm a lesbian trapped in a man's body, and most people don't realize that. So.
Oh, no, I didn't realize that. Wow.
All righty. Well, it is, but it's a distraction. There's also a theory that this is like banning the Confederate flag and flooding us with immigrants. It's an attempt to, again, attack our sense of self, our sense of identity, to make it easier to control us with the New World Order. We'll be talking about that a little bit further in the show. But thank you very much for the phone call, Steve, and we're going to switch over to Randy in Texas. Aloha, Randy. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about Donald Trump.
Okay.
All right. You did know that he was meeting with Kissinger today, right?
Well, hopefully Kissinger is going to give him the real dope on what's been going on with U.S. foreign policy, and maybe this is a sign that Donald Trump is realizing that he is very naive about what's really been going on with the U.S. and too dependent on the corporate media. So this could be a really good thing, where he's going to get some of this inside information. I don't see Trump appointing Kissinger to any kind of a position. I don't think Kissinger wants it. He's kind of semi-retired, and he's already got all these countries he can't set foot in without being arrested. But Trump has to talk to somebody who knows what's really been going on, because the area in which I see him as being weakest is that he is dangerously naive about what's really been going on inside the halls of power, or the bowels of power in Washington, D.C., and he needs to get caught up on that, and Kissinger is the guy who knows all the dirt.
Okay. Yeah, I just don't trust Kissinger, you know?
Well, I don't think Trump trusts him either, but, you know, I think Trump is recognizing that he has to bone up on what the U.S. government has really been doing all these years, that he can't be out there talking about policy based on what the corporate media has been putting out there, because it's all fluff.
Yeah, you do have a valid point there.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's what I wanted to ask, and I'll let you go.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the phone call, Alan. Now, the New York Times is continuing to catch a lot of flack over this hit piece they tried to do on Donald Trump over the weekend. I'm sorry, I do have one more phone call waiting. Alan in California, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay.
Good. I want to talk about. I had a question about the rural bank, but I was just going to ask you a personal question real quick. I know Claire talked about that she plays in the church choir and all that stuff.
Yes.
Does she go to a Christian church?
It's a Methodist church.
A Methodist. Okay, I was just curious because I know that you said in the past you're not very religious, but.
No, I'm not, and I don't have a problem with people who are being religious. You know, you can believe in whatever you want to. Where I step in is when people are using religion to oppress people, control them, or exploit them, like the priestly sexual molestation problem, or some of these big churches that are just plundering their people, and you know, the heads of these big TV churches who are living very wealthy lives, and I have a real issue with that. But if you personally want to believe in Zeus or Quetzalcoatl or the Flying Spaghetti Monster, fine, have fun. I could care less.
Okay. Is there? I just wanted your opinion. I know the Rural Bank is coming out saying that the Federal Reserve is insolvent and they're planning on doing like a global currency reset.
They're not planning on it. It's about to happen. The Federal Reserve will never technically be insolvent because they've got the keys to the printing presses. What's happening is we're seeing other nations dump debt at record levels, and I can't imagine anybody stupid enough to be buying those Treasury bonds right now, except the Federal Reserve, which is just making up the money out of thin air to redeem those Treasury bonds. The problem is there's a flaw in that thinking. At some point, as the dollar starts to devalue from all that instant money creation, the people still holding Treasury bonds are going to demand they be redeemed in something other than the paper dollar, gold, silver, large chunks of American land, something like that. And at that point, we're going to start to see the currency reset. They're not planning for it. They don't want it to happen. The problem is they can't stop it because all private central banking is a pyramid scam, and all pyramid scams eventually collapse.
Now, what do you think about the fact that they're saying that they were going to switch to like an Orem, which is like the pressed gold thing? Do you think something like that might happen?
I think it would be a great idea to go back to a commodity-based, value-based currency system, but it's got to be a public currency managed as a public utility, not turned into a privatized for-profit scam that enslaves the people to hopelessly unpayable debt, which is what we're living in right now. There's the music. I got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, Alan, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, over the weekend, the New York Times launched a hit piece to try and portray Donald Trump as being impolite, rude with women, that he doesn't like them. And this is all coming out of the Hillary campaign, which is trying to regain the so-called vagina vote. And they're losing. Young women are turning away from Hillary. They don't like her. They don't respond to her. So the New York Times put out this huge number of reporters. They did 50 interviews. They spent a huge amount of money and time on this, and they came up with this rather bland story where they had these people, these women being interviewed, which appeared to show that Donald Trump is disrespectful to women. Okay, and it blew up in their face when one of the women being interviewed went public on MSNBC saying that she was taken out of context. They were cherry-picking her quotes, trying to create something other than what she was telling them. Now another young woman who was featured in that hit piece, Carrie Prejean, a former Miss California USA and Miss USA 2009 first runner-up, is also saying the New York Times took her quotes out of context, trying to just come on out and make Donald Trump look like he's mean to women, so you should vote for Hillary Clinton. And as Charles Krauthammer observed, if this is all they can find on Trump, then we need to start planning for Trump's inauguration right now. Now, BuzzFeed on Monday reported that there was this Argentine freelance correspondent for Mexican media outlet TV Azteca was thrown out of the Trump Tower ahead of an interview with Donald Trump because he was found speaking Spanish on his phone. The guy was named Marcos Stupanengo. Well, BuzzFeed went with a C. He's attacking Hispanics. He's racist. He's this. He's that. Well, it turns out that Stupanengo didn't have an interview scheduled with Trump. He was trying to crash on in there and get one, and of course security removed him. You're not supposed to do that. It was this story that they threw him out because he was speaking Spanish was another hoax. And they're getting really transparent. Hillary came out with a new ad about how Trump hates women, and they have this clip of Trump saying that you can tell them to go blank themselves. And of course, anybody who's been following Donald Trump knows that what he was talking about when that clip was recorded was not women, but China. And so that backlash is growing. I mean, Hillary is getting desperate, where she's just grabbing quotes and misrepresenting them. The New York Times is helping her do it. Anderson Cooper is trying to protect her. All of her enablers are on full display. We're getting the smell of fear out of the Hillary Clinton camp, and that may be a dangerous situation. There's a story over in facti.org about an interview with Paul Craig Roberts, who was quoted in this interview as saying that if it comes down to Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton, and it looks like Donald Trump could be winning, that there will be an assassination. Hillary will have the CIA kill Donald Trump. And Paul Craig Roberts is an insider. He was part of the administration of Ronald Reagan. We've had him on our show here. He knows what he's talking about. And we're all concerned about that. Remember when we were seeing all this stuff in the media trying to sort of get us used to the idea that somebody's going to shoot Donald Trump, we might as well just get used to that whole idea. Now, as you know, Hillary has a very well-funded army of Internet trolls, or thugs, whatever you want to call them. And even with $1 million budget, they're obviously losing the battle because somebody over at Investment Watch blog noticed that the exact same word-for-word talking points are starting to appear on social media under the names of different accounts. So they're apparently using that software that the government bought copies of, where they can have one person pretending to be a couple of hundred people and just send the same message out over and over and over again, and they got caught doing it. Now, behind all of this, of course, is the growing email scandal. Now, Hillary Clinton is absolutely, serenely convinced the FBI is not going to report that she did anything bad, and even if they do, Loretta Lynch is not going to prosecute. But there's another aspect that is of more concern. We'll talk about it when we come back from these words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we get back to the news here, let's go ahead and grab a phone call. Clint in Las Vegas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I'm in the L.A. area right now, and this is a talking point. they were talking about the what happened in Las Vegas with the Bernie supporters, and I don't know if I can say their name, KLOS.
Yes.
They were saying, I'm sure you remember them.
Yes.
They were saying that Trump supporters resorted to violence, and they had a
Trump supporters?
They had a recording of a guy calling in saying that, boy, we hope you get yours. We hope we'd hang you and all that, which I found kind of convenient.
Yes.
And you turn it on the other rock stations, and they were saying the same thing. It's almost like they had the same owners, probably Clear Channel.
Probably Clear Channel, yes.
Bernie was the violent one, and never, in all these months I've been here, I've never heard one thing about the email scandal or any of Bill's discretions or anything like that. It's so obvious now, and I just wanted to call you in and report that it's getting kind of obvious right now.
Yeah, that's the problem, and I think the reason they're taking this step of trying to attack Bernie Sanders supporters for being poor losers is, even though the corporate media is fully on board with Hillary Clinton, they're finally realizing that more and more Americans, including Democratic voters, are turning to the independent media to find out what the heck is going on. And word about all the vote fraud and hijacking of conventions and games being played with voter registrations is starting to get out. And we all remember what a debacle it was in Florida in 2000. And so the Hillary campaign is struggling desperately to deflect attention away from the vote fraud by saying, well, Bernie Sanders is just being a sore loser and he really should quit the race. And yeah, any radio station owned by Clear Channel is going to be absolutely towing the line, which is one of the reasons why Clear Channel is billions of dollars in debt right now, because they're alienating their audience. But they can't let go of any of the assets out of fear that some independent media outlet is going to start acquiring on-air assets in major markets and start to get an alternative point of view out there. So they're just pouring in the money. They're throwing good money after bad, and it's going to be this way all the way through November. But again, looking at the polling numbers, it does seem like Hillary's in decline, Bernie's in ascension, and Donald Trump is going like gangbusters. And the more they do to try and derail Trump and Sanders and shove Hillary at us, the closer they're coming to destroying the Democratic Party, destroying the Republican Party, the closer they're edging to triggering an outright revolution in this country, which I would like to avoid. But unfortunately, it's not up to me anymore. It's up to these political money junkies who think that setting the country on fire to keep Donald Trump out of office is an acceptable tactic.
Can I say one thing? I'll let you go.
Sure.
Coming from John Q. Public here, if anything happens to Donald Trump on the way to the White House, all eyes are on Hillary. And it ain't going to be it's not even going to be a question. No, I'm looking at Hillary.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Look at all the dead bodies that litter the Clintons' past. There's no question. You know, Kay Bono, who's going to benefit from Donald Trump being killed? Obviously Hillary. And I think the time of his maximum risk is before the GOP convention, where then the GOP can go on into the convention, oh, we mourn the passing of our star, the people's favorite, but we've got a substitute here that we're going to put into the race and hand the White House to Hillary Clinton. But, of course, it's going to be Hillary.
Guy, yeah.
It's going to be Hillary.
Canadian
Yeah.
guy.
I'm sorry? Yeah, the Canadian guy. We're going to get the Canadian guy shoved at us.
Okay, I'll let you go, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, we're getting on back to Hillary Clinton's email scandal. At the moment, that is her point of maximum vulnerability. Not because of the FBI and the Department of Justice. They have been brought under control. Remember, Hillary can still blackmail the FBI for having helped cover up the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster. So she's got them locked. I'm not expecting the FBI to do its job. If by some miracle it does, if there are enough young FBI agents who were not around in 1994 and don't feel that they're constrained by that past guilt, try and force the issue, then we have Attorney General Loretta Lynch, who's already out there saying that she thinks treason and espionage by a serving Secretary of State just isn't worth prosecuting. But by golly, we're going to get those global warming deniers. We're going to prosecute them under RICO. We're going to teach them to speak back to power. But there is that civil case from Judicial Watch, because Judicial Watch is a private organization. It's not under the control of the government. I'm sure there's a lot of pressure coming down on them right now. But they have a judge who is looking at what's going on and saying there really is something here that has to be looked at. And now, of course, Judicial Watch has got discovery. They're bringing in Hillary Clinton's closest aides and assistants, including the gentleman who set up that server, and they're going to depose Hillary Clinton herself. And at the very least, they're looking at a violation of Section 793 of Title 18. And remember, under Title 18, if you are guilty of violating any part of Title 18, you are banned from holding public office. And so Hillary Clinton is not afraid of the FBI. She's not afraid of the Department of Justice. She's not afraid of the White House. But she is very concerned about Judicial Watch. And they've been scoring points. Much of the really embarrassing revelations that have come out about Hillary have come from Judicial Watch, not from the FBI, not the Department of Justice. My nickel is on Judicial Watch to really get something done. Now, apparently, former CIA smuggler Robert Tosh Plum Lee has come forward exposing that there was, in fact, a link between Operation Fast and Furious and the Benghazi consulate, because we know that consulate in Benghazi was the hub for the clandestine gun-running operation that was sending weapons to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, at a time when we were told ISIS and Al-Qaeda were our declared enemies in the war on terror, which means arming them constitutes an act of treason by the Obama administration and by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. WikiLeaks has come out with another email in which they basically state flat out, Hillary Clinton is out there saying the Obama administration is trying to destroy Syria, at least in part, to help Israel. Oh, Israel wants Assad gone. Well, we have to do what Israel tells us. So think about all the money that's been poured into these wars so far. Think about all of our kids who've come back killed and crippled and realize it's not for the benefit of the American people. It's for the benefit of the money junkies, for the benefit of Israel, for the benefit of the military-industrial complex, and as far as what's good for you, the American people. They could care less. Your job is to pay the bills and breed new soldiers as fast as you can. That's how they see you. Okay. Now, here's an interesting little article. Came out of Patriot Rising. Is Mitt on a suicide mission? And they're talking about this Never Trump movement. Mitt Romney has apparently walked away from the possibility of becoming the candidate at a brokered convention. But he is definitely marshaling people trying to create a third party to challenge Donald Trump, to take votes away from Donald Trump and put Hillary in the White House. It's not getting a lot of traction. I don't even think they're going to be able to get their third-party candidate on the ballot in most of the states, because the deadline for the petitions to put a candidate on the ballot has come and gone for most of them. And a lot of people are saying, what is going on? Are they really willing to give the White House to Hillary to keep Donald Trump out? Yeah, apparently. That's what it looks like. Over at therealnews.com, they're of the exact same opinion. Republicans would rather lose this election than let Donald Trump get inside. And it's like I said earlier, this election isn't about Republican versus Democrat. It's not about liberal versus conservative. It's about the insiders versus the outsiders. And all the insiders, Republican, Democrat alike, are just united together. They want another insider as president. They want Hillary. They don't want Bernie Sanders. And they certainly don't want Donald Trump. And by golly, if you're a loyal American, you will just sit there and accept the rulers they appoint for you, which, of course, is not what America is supposed to be about. Polls are continuing to show that Bernie Sanders is more likely to be able to defeat Donald Trump than Hillary. Of course, it's hard to trust the polls that are all being rigged here. And again, as I've said, all of these polls about a matchup between Hillary and Donald Trump are not taking into account all the disaffected Democrats who are going to vote for Donald Trump because they're angry at what's been done to them all across the country in the primaries. And I'm sure from Hillary's point of view, she's out there saying, well, look, I cheated Sanders out of the nomination. I can cheat Trump out of the White House. That's how good we are. Because we learned at the feet of a master Richard Milhouse Nixon and the Committee to Re-elect the President, otherwise known as CREEP. A very suitable acronym for what Nixon's people were doing. Now, rising from the dead, screaming for brains, he is risen. Ted Cruz is saying the fight is not over with the GOP convention nearing. He is out there. He still wants that White House. Must have brains. The zombie Cruz. Okay, one more time for those people who were not paying attention. Take notes. There will be a snap quiz next period. The Constitution of the United States of America requires the President to be a natural-born U.S. citizen, meaning a U.S. citizen by birth, born inside the United States of America. Ted Cruz was born in Canada, of parents who were Canadian citizens at the time of Ted's birth. Canada did not recognize dual citizenship when Ted was born, so Ted's mother was no longer a U.S. citizen when he was born. Ted's supporters are trying to get around that by saying, well, because Ted Cruz's mother was born in Delaware, that he was automatically a U.S. citizen at birth. Wrong. Ted Cruz's father was still married to his previous wife when Ted was born. And Section 309C of the Immigration and Naturalization Act states that children born to American citizens in foreign lands out of wedlock do not receive birthright citizenship. Ted Cruz is not a natural-born U.S. citizen. He's a naturalized U.S. citizen. Ted Cruz and his supporters are just ignoring the Constitution, and we've already had far too much of that in our political class. And again, the fallacy of Ted Cruz's claim that he can be eligible for the presidency despite being born in another country is exposed with a very simple thought experiment. Let us say that back in the 1960s, an American woman emigrates to the Soviet Union. She marries a Russian, and they have a child. Okay? And then maybe 18 years later, she moves back to the United States with her son. Under Ted Cruz's arguments, that child, born and raised as a Soviet citizen, should be eligible to run for the U.S. presidency? Does that make any sense? Of course not, which is why the Founding Fathers added that natural-born requirement for the presidency, so that the Oval Office would only be occupied by somebody with a deep emotional attachment to this country. Not Canada, not Russia, not Israel. It's amazing. Little bit of embarrassment for Mike Webb, who's running for Congress in Virginia's 8th District, was trying to illustrate a point about employment and was showing a screenshot of a website on his campaign's Facebook page, unaware that there were still some pornography site tabs open. Whoopsie. Whoopsie, whoopsie. Oh, well. Might actually, well, it's going to get him talked about. Might actually help him get reelected if you think about it. Turning to the war zones. The United States, Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia are launching a military operation in northern Syria. They're forming a coalition for a large-scale military operation. In other words, they're invading. They're just going to flat out invade northern Syria. They're going to go and they're going to kick out Bashar al-Assad. Because, according to that leaked Hillary email, that's what Israel wanted. And we always do what Israel tells us to do. Saudi Arabia is warning of a Plan B for Syria. The U.S. is publicly calling for all sides to work together, as long as they're all working together to get Bashar al-Assad out. And the U.S. is still making the position. Assad will either be removed, he'll either walk out, or we will kick him out. That's it. The U.S. has not abandoned the agenda. They want Assad out. They want a U.S. puppet ruler in. Because after all, look how wonderful it worked out in Yemen and Libya and Iraq. See how smooth those nations are all going along now with their U.S. puppet rulers. Meanwhile, the Pentagon is still out there trying to blame Putin for ISIS. And we know that's absolute nonsense because of those declassified Department of State documents, pried loose by Judicial Watch, that confirmed again the U.S. was covertly arming and supporting and training both ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria as proxies against Bashar al-Assad. Russia has come on out and reminded everybody that while the U.S. was in Syria claiming to fight ISIS, mostly they were destroying Syrian infrastructure, and in fact assets that Syria could use against ISIS were targeted for bombing. It's a little double game. Then Russia comes on the side of the legitimate Syrian government, and ISIS is all but chased out, and that's why they've hit the panic button, and they're going back in again. And they are risking direct military confrontation with Russia. Because we know the U.S.-backed forces are not going after ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They want Assad. They have made that clear time after time after time. Now we're getting our usual dose of Iran bashing. As you know, once Syria is conquered, Iran is next on the special high-interest targets list. And now we're starting to talk. The latest propaganda device is we have classified documents. We have secret documents. We can't show them to you, but they say these terrible things. Remember Senator Joseph McCarthy? I have a list of names in my briefcase. And Harry Truman used to say the only thing that was in McCarthy's briefcase was a bottle of scotch. So now they're talking about classified details of how Iran treated those captured U.S. sailors. It will shock the nation. They just behaved all badly. Small detail, everyone seems to forget, those sailors did violate Iran's territorial waters. They were there without the permission of the Iranian government. From what we've seen, Iran showed tremendous restraint. We don't care about that. We need to invade Iran because Israel wants Iran smashed up, and we need to have Iran's oil sold for the dollar, and the war must go on. Blah, 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 blah. All right. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about Iran. Now, you know that there was this recent court decision that victims of 9/11 can sue Iran and seize some of the assets that are frozen inside the United States based on allegations and accusations only. No proof required. And now Congress is passing a bill to allow the same thing against Saudi Arabia. Iran, in response, is voting on a bill that will file a lawsuit demanding compensation from the United States for the 1953 coup that ousted Iran's elected government of Mohammad Mossadegh and imposed the Shah of Iran on Iran from 1953 all the way through 1979. And the difference here is that the U.S. has admitted to stealing Iran. And I'm sure the damages for all that was suffered under the Shah certainly are going to be far greater than anything coming out of 9/11. Let's grab a phone call. Matt in Colorado. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. How are you doing today?
Doing good.
You know what I think it just drives me crazy is that I don't know if you remember the interview that Wesley Clark did with the lady from Democracy Now!
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's in plain sight. I mean, he was a former U.S. general and also head of NATO, and he said we were going to take him down, and we're doing it in plain sight, and I'm speechless. I don't understand. They said that they had the plan, they're doing this, and they're doing it, and then they're just using mainstream media to support their case.
Yeah, to sell the war, to push the propaganda. Reminds me very much about that wonderful Jackson Browne song, Lives in the Balance. And you can go out, you can find it on YouTube, but it basically was used as a soundtrack for an episode of the original Miami Vice, which is where I first heard it. And I fell in love with it, right there, talking about how these revolutions are ginned up by financial interests and how, corporate media sells us presidents and cars and various things like that. But that's exactly what's going on. Now, the corporate media doesn't report about what Wesley Clark said. It was on Democracy Now! Was picked up by the rest of the independent media. People who are here following the independent media understand there was a war agenda coming out of the Project for the New American Century to basically make the world the United States, and part of it was to retake control of the resource-rich areas of the world to force them to trade those resources only for U.S. dollars to keep up foreign demand for dollars, following Richard Nixon's ending of gold convertibility, which ended the Bretton Woods Agreement. Nobody had a reason to get dollars anymore if they weren't backed by gold. So they replaced it with the petrodollar deal, and that held for a little while. Then that began to fall apart, and that's why the U.S. is out there conquering all these resource-rich areas of the world to put in a puppet government who will say, well, you can buy our oil or our gas or our molybdenum or our uranium, but you have to pay for it with U.S. dollars. So you go over to the U.S. and you borrow those dollars at interest or whatever else. And that's really what these wars are all about. And a lot of people have a real hard time accepting that all of this bloodshed is all about an argument over whose brand of ink and paper the world will use for the next 100 years. Matt, I need to let you go. We've got to take a break for our top-of-the-hour station break, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we're going to go right to the phones to talk to Kim in Missouri. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I'm a fairly new listener, and I guess one thing I don't understand is when exactly or what time frame did Israel, when did they start having such control over the United States, and why do we allow that?
Well, we the people don't allow it, but Israel has been basically getting its tentacles into the United States bit by bit almost ever since it was created. And a lot of it has to do with financial leverage. A lot of it has to do with the willingness to spy and blackmail. And it's reached a point where our government is full of these dual nationals, which I think is an utter absurdity. We should have a rule in the new blueprint, or the blueprint for the new America, that all civil offices are held by people with a single citizenship of this country. And there are actually nations in Europe that are getting ready to enforce the same thing. Because when you get these dual nationals, I mean, it's just common sense. No politician can serve two masters. And those who are serving Israel cannot, will not, and do not serve the American people. And we need to get leaders back in government who are going to put this country first. And we don't have it right now. And Israel has just been a master of being able to subvert foreign governments, not just the United States. They've done it up in Canada. They've done it all across Europe. Look at what's going on in France right now, where, you know, criticism of Israel is now criminalized. No matter what Israel's government actually does, you can't talk about it without being thrown in jail.
Wow. Well, I that's what I was wondering, if a lot of it had to do with blackmail.
Yes.
And what I meant was, why do we go along with? I didn't mean the people, but why would the president and the senators and the congressmen, and why would we all vote to fight their wars and so on?
Well, the reason has to do with a big part of it comes out of AIPAC, which is the American Israel Political Affairs Committee. It is the largest foreign policy lobby in Washington, D.C., and amazingly enough, it is exempt from the law that it has to register as a foreign lobby, which would subject it to certain rules of behavior. And they just run rampant. They have huge amounts of money. And what's going on here is there's a little bit of a kickback scheme. Congress will vote to send Israel $3 billion, now it's going to be $4.5 billion of your tax money every single year, plus there's a lot of under-the-table stuff going on. Israel sends some of that back to AIPAC to fund the campaigns of congressmen that they know will continue to vote more money and weapons for Israel. A good example of Israel's unhealthy influence on our government would be Cynthia McKinney, who was in Congress, and she was out there very critical of some of the U.S. wars. She was the person who pointed out that the so-called emergency food packets that were being dropped on Afghanistan when we went to war there were painted the same color and used the same typeface as the submunitions on cluster bombs, which meant Afghan people, children especially, who couldn't read English, saw these submunitions, thought they were food packages, picked them up, and blew their hands off. And she stood up and said, this is wrong. And she was very critical of Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. So the next election, AIPAC poured a huge amount of money into her challenger. In fact, most of the money for her challenger came from outside the district, which is a dead giveaway. And they basically got her kicked out of Congress. And members of Congress, they're afraid of the wrath of AIPAC. Anytime you see Netanyahu speaking in Congress and you see the entire Congress leaping to their feet and banging their hands together like trained seals over at the circus, you know, it's because AIPAC is up there in the gallery with camcorders, and they just say flat out, if you do not give Netanyahu 24 standing ovations, you will get no money and support from us your next campaign.
So is it when Obama apparently, you know, or we're told that he despises Benjamin Netanyahu, is that for real?
Oh, yeah. You know, it's very rare for a slave to love their master. And, you know, even when you've gone along with the Israel agenda to be allowed to be president, I mean, have you ever noticed how anybody running for Congress or the White House, the first thing they do is they go over to Israel and they get their photograph taken wearing a yarmulke and touching the remains of that old Roman fort, you know, so that they can get Israel's permission to be an elected official here in the United States. Here's what's going on here. We're under foreign puppet rule. Our government in Washington, D.C. is a Vichy government running this country on behalf of foreign masters. The Iraqi don't like it. The Afghani don't like it. The Yemenites don't like it. The Libyans don't like it. Why should we be comfortable with that?
Well, you know, my daughter dates a surgeon here in St. Louis, and he's from Iraq, and he would tell her all the time about the things that Israel would do. Well, I had a hard time believing that because, you know, I'm a Bible-believing Christian, you know, and, you know, we're to stand by Israel and so on, but...
Well, Israel keeps saying that. I mean, Israel has successfully hijacked the end times myth and the Bible to build a huge amount of support among Christians such as yourself that they really don't deserve for a couple of reasons. First of all, the majority of the Jewish people living in Israel today are not descended from the biblical Hebrews. It's a, you know, they're descended from Central Asian Khazars who converted to Judaism in about 800 AD. But they know that Christians have this Bible and this connection with the Old Testament, and they exploit that to get the support of American Christians. There are a large number of people running around this country right now convinced that if they can help Israel start World War III and burn planet Earth to a crisp, that Jesus is going to come down and invite them all up to the big house when it's over.
Wow. Well, but thank you, Mike.
All right.
Yeah. I really appreciate that explanation. It helps me a lot.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call and the kind words. We're going to switch over to Dane in Kentucky. Aloha, Dane. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. First, I want to say, you know, strange times are these in which we live when old and young are told falsehoods at school. And the person that dares to tell the truth is called at once a lunatic and fool.
Yes.
And that's Plato, by the way, 427 BC. So,
yes.
Of course, I know you knew that.
The more things change, the more they stay insane.
Yeah, exactly. I just wanted to say, you know, like 3 weeks ago, CIA Director Brennan came out and said about the 28 classified pages that, you know, that we shouldn't release these. We should hesitate and not release these because they could be inaccurate. Well, I come to the conclusion that is the rest of the 9/11 Commission report inaccurate as well?
Well, here's the problem. That classified 28 pages is a bit of a dodge. Okay? Israel is very worried that most of the world thinks they participated in 9/11. The U.S. government is very concerned that more and more Americans think they were behind 9/11. And they're constantly using 9/11 to justify invasions. First, it was Afghanistan was behind 9/11, and we invaded them and smashed the place. And then the U.S. government says, oh, our bad, it wasn't Afghanistan, it was Iraq. And so we went into Iraq and smashed that place. And so 9/11 has become the one-size-fits-all excuse to justify invasion of a country. And Saudi Arabia is next on the special high-interest targets list. And I'm sure Saudi Arabia is learning a very hard lesson that loyalty to the United States government is not returned, because Saudi Arabia was on that list that General Wesley Clark had out there of areas to be conquered and placed under U.S. puppet control. But the government understands when they come out and they say this person did 9/11 or that person did 9/11. They don't get any traction. We don't believe a thing they said. So they were trying to dodge by saying there's these 28 classified pages and you can't see them. And they were trying to get everybody to say, we demand the declassification of the 28 pages so they could say, all right, here's what you wanted, and it's Saudi Arabia. So it was an attempt to sort of data launder the next bit of propaganda, but they didn't get a lot of traction. So last week they were saying, well, in addition to the 28 pages, the FBI has 20,000 pages of information that Saudi Arabia did 9/11. This week they've upped it to 80,000. They're just really pushing Saudi Arabia 9/11, but it doesn't make any sense. And the reason it doesn't...
I guess it's whoever's money we have a lot of is who we're going to blame next.
Yeah, and then we seize their money and we can take it or we invade them. But a good guide, a good way to find out if you're being lied to when the government or the media gives you a story is to look for what should be there and isn't. Okay, and to give you one example, when they were out there screaming that Bashar al-Assad was using sarin gas on his own Alawite supporters right in front of the United Nations chemical weapons inspectors on the very day they arrived. The part that should have been there and wasn't was a reason for Assad to do something that stupid. And, of course, it turned out that it were the U.S.-backed terror groups using the chemical weapons to frame Assad. The same thing applies to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has grown rich off the petrodollar deal. They have invested much of that money back in the United States of America, not just in treasury bonds, but direct investment to thousands and thousands of U.S. companies and corporations. They own huge blocks of stock. Saudi Arabia is not going to do anything that would allow the United States to simply grab all that money. And if Saudi Arabia, for whatever reason, wanted to hurt the United States of America, all they have to do is ask for their money back. And it would crash the entire American financial system, and it would be perfectly legal and moral for Saudi Arabia to do it. The story just doesn't make sense. It makes sense that the U.S. did 9/11 to launch the project for the New American Century's plan for global war. It makes sense Israel would do it to trick the U.S. into more war on Israel's enemies in the Middle East. It doesn't make sense that Saudi Arabia had anything to do with it. And we know now, I mean, we have George W. Bush on video admitting Iraq never did have anything to do with 9/11. But they were just bad people, and that's why we had to invade them.
I don't know what to say. You know, the rich, they don't get prosecuted. I guess they're above the law.
Well, most times, yes, but then every once in a while you'll have something like the French Revolution where history catches up with them.
Bloodshed is, you know, the thing.
Now, I'd like to avoid it, but, you know, again, how bloody and violent the future is going to get is not under our control. I would just assume we all had a life of prosperity and peace and plenty, but as long as you have money junkies to whom no amount of wealth will ever satisfy their cravings, inevitably it destabilizes society and it leads to war and bloodshed. I mean, there's already a lot of blood flowing all over the planet from U.S. Aggressions. And so it's not a new idea to say that we're heading into a period of bloodshed. We're already there.
Well, I tried to do my due diligence yesterday with the Kentucky Democratic primary by voting in Bernie Sanders, but, you know, people like my father, you know, older generations, they just see, you know, Hillary Clinton as this wonderful woman. But, you know, anyways, I'll be voting for Trump come presidential election.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for everything.
Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Get on back to the news. All right. Over in Iraq, things are starting to escalate, and not in a good way for the United States. This has become a major problem. Starting at the end of World War II, U.S. foreign policy was very simple. We send in all sorts of non-governmental agencies and covert forces into a country. We kick up unrest, destabilize it, topple the elected government, install a U.S. puppet dictator. They did it in Iran in 1953, which Iran is now going to sue for. Chile in 1973, the Philippines under Marcos, Cuba under Batista. They've done it. They've tried to do it to 50-some countries since the end of World War II, and they succeed about half the time. Chile and Iran were successes for a while. Too soon to say about Ukraine. And they're trying to do it again. The problem is now, in the 21st century, the people of planet Earth understand this is what's going on. You know, back before, 1950s, 1960s, the people in these countries would buy the propaganda that this was a genuine, organic, popular uprising by the people of their country against an unpopular government. And after the revolution and things got worse, and they'd say, well, things are worse, but at least we dealt, with the bad government, not realizing that their country had been stolen by the United States. Today it's different. Today people understand that's what's going on. That's why the U.S. keeps having to go back into these countries, because the people of these countries understand there wasn't a revolution. Their country was stolen. The people of Afghanistan understand that. That's why the U.S. is having to go back in there, protect the flow of oil, protect the flow of opium, having to go back into Iraq time and time and time again, had to go back into Libya, having to go back into Yemen, still trying to get into Syria. The agenda, the policy is failing. It doesn't work anymore, but they can't adapt to the new reality of a better educated global population. So over in Iraq, Muqtada al-Sadr has been sending messages to the U.S. puppet rulers. Okay, you need to start taking care of Iraq and the Iraqi people. The U.S. military is back in Iraq ostensibly to fight ISIS, but Iraq's military is saying the U.S. forces are getting in between Iraq's military and ISIS and literally protecting ISIS. The plan up there is the U.S. wants to carve a new Kurdistan out of part of Syria, part of Turkey, and part of Iraq, which Iraq and Turkey and Syria are very much opposed to. But the U.S. government could care less. We have plans. We're going to redraw the map of the world because we all own stock in the globe companies, and they'll have to buy new globes, and we'll make money. Or some such nonsense as that. Not too long ago, Muqtada al-Sadr held a peaceful demonstration where he and his people walked into the green zone, right past security, took over the Parliament building, held it, and then left peacefully. That was a message, a metaphorical shot across the bow. Well, all of a sudden, we're seeing all these terror bombings happening all over Baghdad, apparently to justify the U.S. remilitarizing the green zone. And Muqtada al-Sadr has apparently pulled the Mahdi army back together, and they're already deploying in some areas. So the U.S. is going to have to go back into Iraq yet again, by which I mean they're going to be sending more of your sons and daughters back into Iraq for the, I've lost count, 5th, 6th, 7th time, trying to reconquer those Iraqis, because by golly, they don't understand the rules, that once you are conquered by the American empire, you stay conquered. Those are the rules we just made up. What's wrong with you people here? So far, 184 killed in and around Baghdad. So that is falling apart. Over in Turkey, President Erdogan, who is definitely succumbing to delusions of grandeur, is out there saying that it's time to rescue Crimea. We have to rescue Crimea that was stolen by the Russians, which didn't happen. But that's Erdogan's new thing. We need to rescue Crimea. Okay, Erdogan, if you really feel that way, here's your rifle. Here's your parachute. We ran out of the camouflage BDUs, so here's a bright day-glow orange jumpsuit left over from the CIA's torture prisons. Watch your head climbing into that transport plane, and we'll call Vladimir Putin and tell him you are on your way to kick his butt all by yourself. Rest of us, we're going to sit this one out, because we know Russia did not steal Crimea. Crimea held a referendum to secede from Kiev following the U.S.-backed coup d'etat, because the government in Kiev was no longer one of their own choosing. And the right to self-determination is guaranteed by the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So they voted to secede, then they voted to extend a request to join the Russian republics, which Putin accepted. And that's what actually happened. But the propaganda is out there saying, oh, Russia stole Crimea. They are those bad people. How dare they do that? Meanwhile, a regional council in Italy's northeastern Veneto region, which has its administrative center in Venice, just voted through a resolution recognizing Crimea as part of the Russian republics and lifting all economic sanctions on Moscow. The vote was 27-9. Europe is getting fed up with all this Russian sanctions nonsense. It has hurt them far more than it hurt Russia. And the people of Europe are just getting fed up of having their lives destroyed as the price of U.S. hegemonic domination of the world. They've had enough of it. They want it to. It's gone far enough. Like Donald Trump, they want to go back to being friends with other countries and trading with them. That's it. Free trade. Real free trade. Not this arm twist, you will buy our GMOs we're seeing out of the TPP and TTIP. They're really kind of tired of all that. I mean, look how long we've been at war. Do you realize Barack Obama has been at war longer than any other U.S. president in history? The current war that we've had ever since 9/11 has gone on longer than World War I and World War II put together. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're going to take a phone call from Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. You just said something interesting about Erdogan or Erdogan, depending on how we're pronouncing it today. I'm thinking of your one of your sayings. Maybe the fastest way to get Erdogan out of there is to let him do what he says. If he were to attack some...
Hello? Are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, you dropped out there for a second. Here's the complication with that. If everybody were just going to stand back and let Erdogan attack Russia and suffer the consequences, that would be one thing. But if Erdogan attacks Russia and Russia counterattacks, that opens the door for the U.S. to go on in and get the hot phase of World War III started while claiming it's all Russia's fault. You need to understand the U.S. government needs war with Russia and China to prevent the yuan and ruble from further displacing the U.S. dollar in global commerce. That's what this is all about. Okay? Glenn, I can't hear you, so we're going to have to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call. And we seem to be having a little bit of technical issues today. Now, NATO has announced the deployment of 5 new elite battalions along the borders of Russia because, gosh darn it, those Russians are acting aggressively. No, they're not. Deploying 5 battalions along the borders of another country, that is aggression. You don't see 5 battalions of Russians on the northern side of our border with Canada. You don't see 5 battalions of Russians on the southern side of our border with Mexico. You don't see Russian warships, carriers, and battle groups tooling around the Gulf of Mexico playing war games, do you? We know who the aggressor is, and we know why. Now, Russia, of course, is responding to all of these new provocations asymmetrically. They're restarting up a radar station they had in Crimea to guard against missile attacks coming in from these forces the U.S. is putting out there. And obviously, Putin does have to take precautions because he knows the U.S. is coming for him. And every time he takes a precaution, the media says, aha, see, Russia is preparing for war. They're preparing to defend themselves. Okay. Apparently, Glenn in Philadelphia came back, and we have a better phone connection. What's on your mind? Hello?
Yeah, that was a bit odd. I'm here, Mike.
Okay, good.
I'm thinking that maybe the quickest way to get rid of Erdogan is let him act on some of the saber-rattling. If he were to attack some Russian assets in Crimea, it would take the Russians probably about 15 minutes to establish air superiority. All they would have to do is leave some very deep potholes in some select military airfields in Turkey, and his own people might overthrow him, realizing what he was getting them into. Well,
that could very well be a possibility, but again, any conflict between Turkey and Russia would be welcomed by the United States. They would seize it as an opportunity to say, Russia is at war with our ally, we must go on in. I hope you, weren't planning on using those young men and young women because we need them for the war machine. That's the danger here.
But didn't some of the other NATO countries recently tell Turkey that if they behave this way, they couldn't necessarily expect to be supported by NATO?
Yeah, that's true. Okay, but that doesn't necessarily mean the U.S. wouldn't simply come in as the United States. We know the U.S. is trying to gin up a war with Russia and China for economic reasons. And if NATO goes along, great, and if they don't, the U.S. may just try and go it alone. How many times have we heard that in the past? If we can't get the Allies to go in and get Saddam's nuclear weapons, we will go it alone. And they went ahead and did exactly that.
If the U.S. tried that, you might get a twofer, because Erdogan might get overthrown, and Obama might get overthrown. I don't think Obama's dumb enough to do that. You know, we might end up with a coup if that happened.
Well, Obama, I think, realizes that the U.S. is not actually capable of winning a conventional war against Russia. And that is just the reality, which is why it's so dangerous. If it gets started, war with Russia and China will inevitably lead to the United States' use of its nuclear arsenal. And they'll just sit there under the mushroom clouds and the radioactivity coming down saying, they made us do it, Mommy. Putin made us blow up the world. It's all his fault. We got to let you go and take a break for commercials. Thank you very much. Back with more phone calls after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're going to go right to the phones here to Roger in Arkansas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, here's a little tidbit about the Jews from a website.
Well, can we talk about Israel? Let's talk about Israel, because we're trying to keep a big black line between the actions of the government of Israel and the world's Jewish people. And we don't want to do overgeneralization, okay? So what's on your mind?
Well, okay, I'll read this, and then you can tell me where you want me to go further. But today it is taught in the schools that anti-Semitism began in Germany in the 1930s, after which they were deported. What is not studied is the fact that at one time or the other, the Jews have been expelled from every nation in Europe. When the Jews first
it goes back 2,000 years. It goes back 2,000 years. Yes, you're absolutely right.
Is when the Jews first began to immigrate to America, the early colonists in New York, Charleston, and Savannah tried to ban their entry. Benjamin Franklin pleaded with the members of the Continental Congress to enter a specific ban against Jewish immigration into the U.S. Constitution.
Yes.
George Washington, in Maxims of George Washington by A.A. Appleton and Company, they, the Jews, work more effectively against us than the enemy's armies.
Okay, well, let me cut this down here a little bit, because we're running tight on time here. But basically, the issue has always been, if you look at the entire list of places where there have been pogroms or repression or expulsions, there's only one common factor throughout it all, and it is the way the Jewish people, by virtue of their religious beliefs, treat everybody else around them. This, God's chosen people, we're superior, everybody else is here to just serve us. That kind of an attitude is going to create hostility. In a lot of ways, what happened to the Jewish people throughout history was very similar to what happened to the Roma, to the Gypsies. The difference is the Gypsies kind of failed, and Israel succeeded in getting their own nation. And it is this refusal to integrate and work within a culture as opposed to treating it in a predatory relation. That's been the heart of it all along. It isn't Christians who are being anti-Semitic. It isn't the Muslims who are being the enemy. It's how you treat the rest of the world around you. And until the Jewish faith is willing to take a good look at itself and its behavior and how it treats other people, there's always going to be this friction and hostility. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over to John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. I want to congratulate you, Michael.
Yes? What did I do this time?
Finally coming out as a bearded Leslie bin. I'm sure it was a great surprise to the lovely lady.
Oh, no, she's known all along.
So, I want to point out all this saber rattling by Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Qatar, and the other Gulf states, that with just 50 air assets, Russia has destroyed ISIS virtually. I mean, it's on the verge.
Well, it was easy. They were actually aiming at ISIS. That's why they looked so good. I mean, the U.S. was out there saying, really, we're just here to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and we're sorry about the food storage places, and we're sorry about the pipelines and the electrical generating station and the water treatment plant. Really, our pilots are just such terrible shots with all these things, but really, we're there to try and get ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So, of course, Russia was going to prove to be superior there.
Well, unfortunately, I want to give a heads up to the Pentagon. When they've only got 1 in 5 of their air assets that are actually airworthy, and these Russians have been there for, 8 months?
Yes.
And their air assets are still plowing away. America is looking to be outgunned because so many of their assets are in maintenance, remain in maintenance. I mean, they're robbing these graveyards. And,
the boneyard, yeah, we were talking about that the other day. I mean, we've got, only half the B-1 Lancers are still flight worthy, and the U.S. government, along with the costs of the outright war itself, has been plowing money into these new high-tech weapons that really are not working, instead of just getting something that is simple, elegant, and works and is effective. In a lot of ways, the U.S. government has made the same strategic mistake that the Nazis did toward the end of the war. They put all their resources into the wonder weapons, and they came up with some amazing stuff, but they couldn't produce it in enough numbers to materially change the outcome of the war.
Yeah, the other thing is, this nonsense with Crimea. Very shortly, that bridge between Russia across that small, open water area between Russia and Crimea will be completed. We're looking at end of 2017, and it'll be done. That will make a huge difference. So unless things move quickly, Russia will have them beat again.
Well, unfortunately, I think they are moving quickly, and we're hearing about how this U.S. coalition of the subjugated is getting ready to mount an outright ground assault into northern Syria. And they're going to be aiming right at Damascus. This is going to be a decapitation strike. They're going to try and take Assad out. I would not be surprised if he was hit with a cruise missile attack.
Well, unfortunately, and again to counter that, Russia has now moved the Kuznetsov back into the Mediterranean, and with their cruise missiles and the Kuznetsov is not your standard aircraft carrier. It's got anti-submarine systems. It's got ground-to-air missile systems and all sorts on board, including cruise missiles, as well as the air assets.
Well,
this is really building up rapidly.
Unfortunately, it really, really is, and all the U.S. is waiting for is a way to start the war and make it look like it's Russia's fault. In fact, they may even just blow up something really important and say, oh, my goodness, Russia's attacking, Russia's attacking. It could be that obvious and heavy-handed.
Well, I think then, of course, they've got to contend with China at the other end of the world, if you like, the South China Sea. There's 36,000 islands in that South China Sea, and China operates and works from 3 of them, and there's all this kerfuffle. What nonsense.
Well, it is nonsense because at the end of World War II, there was a treaty called the Cairo Convention, which basically said, okay, we're going to take away all these islands Japan captured, and we're going to return them to China. And the United States signed that treaty. So the reality is the United States long ago said, yes, these are Chinese islands. So the U.S. is in violation of international law when they're out there, doing their freedom of navigation exercises. And by the way, even those are illegal because when you send a warship to do a freedom of navigation exercise, it's a display of power and control. That's prohibited by the Law of the Sea Convention. The U.S. government has gone totally rogue. They're ignoring international law and treaty obligations in this rush to try and get a war going between the Federal Reserve note and the gold-backed yuan.
Well, shock horror, Michael. The U.S. has reneged and violated another treaty. Knock me down with a feather.
Well, unfortunately, it's true. And the end result is that nobody can trust anything the U.S. government can say anymore. And I'm not just talking about the general population who's being propagandized, but every other country is going to realize you cannot trust the U.S. government. Saudi Arabia is learning that right now. Saudi Arabia has been the loyal handmaiden of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East for decades, and now all of a sudden they find the U.S. gun sights turned on them.
Well, yes, it was prophesied by Mr. Wesley Clark, the NATO chief in Europe.
Yes, it was. All right, well, listen, I'm going to let you go here because we got a bunch of stuff to cover going into the third hour. Thank you very much for the phone call. And again, the propaganda is this is all China's fault, and the U.S. top brass is out there saying, you know, Beijing doesn't support stability of the South China Sea region. Actually, it was all very stable until the U.S. showed up. And they're out there trying, these are disputed islands. No, they're not disputed. In 1943, the U.S. government signed a treaty saying, yes, these belong to China. The U.S. is trying to pick a fight with Russia and China and convince you that it's all Russia and China's fault. All wars are based on deception. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Now, Finland is getting ready to ban dual nationals from civil careers. If you want to be in the government in Finland, you will be a Finnish citizen and only a Finnish citizen. By golly, we sure as heck need that here in the United States of America, and it will be in the blueprint for the new America. You want to be in the government, you will be an American citizen and only an American citizen, and you will sever your allegiances to other countries, such as Israel. Because no government can serve two masters. And a government that is serving Israel cannot, does not, and will not serve the American people. In these dark and dangerous times, America needs leaders who will put America first, second, and third, and all the other little beggars and parasites way, way down on the list. And right now, this election cycle, there's only one candidate who's willing to put America first, and that's Donald Trump. Which is why they're screaming, he's an anti-Semite. You can't make America first. You're supposed to keep Israel first. What's wrong with you? God will get you for that. Or an Israeli assassin. Over in Europe, as I mentioned a little bit before in another context, the European Union states have just about had it with all these sanctions against Russia. Because it has caused far more economic damage to Europe than to Russia. And Europe is really sick and tired of paying the price for America's ambitions of global domination. They're paying a huge economic price in the loss of trade. They're paying a huge price because of all the harm and crime caused by this immigration agenda. And they're getting fed up with it. Over in Great Britain, when they're talking about, you know, the Brexit, the British people are really in serious economic straits right now because the European Central Bank has been sucking vast sums of money out of Great Britain in order to prop up the rest of Europe. And all Britain gets back from the EU is a bunch of immigrants and a lot of little tiny rules about how they're not allowed to use tea kettles and toasters anymore. And when you add to that the spectacle of a woman sitting there in a jewel-encrusted crown worth £1 million sitting on a gold chair in a room full of millionaires saying that ordinary Britons have to learn to live within their means, it's sending out a very, very bad message to the British people. And they're getting angry. More clashes as protests turn violence across France over their push toward austerity. They're calling it labor reform, meaning you will work harder, you will work longer, you will be paid less, and forget about pensions and retirement. And Francois Hollande is out there saying he absolutely will not back down because, by golly, his masters at the European Central Bank are saying you will make the people of France poor so we can be richer. And by golly, that's what Hollande is going to do. Meanwhile, the people of France are saying, have you seen the blueprints for the guillotines around? They were just here. Saudi Arabia has suffered a huge amount of damage from this misguided, brain-dead attempt at an oil price war to harm Russia. And yes, it harmed Russia a bit, but Russia's economy was far more resilient than expected, in part because Putin has taken control of their central bank to run Russia's public currency as a public utility. And by the way, it was when he did that, take government control of their private central bank, that he went from being America's friend and ally to the top of the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list. And it's harmed Saudi Arabia's oil revenues, Venezuela, certainly, Canada. The U.S. fracking industry is now hopelessly in the red and cannot recover. Saudi Arabia has reached a point. They've burned through their revenue reserves faster than anybody thought, probably due to corruption. They're talking about IOUs to contractors. They may be forced to start liquidating their American holdings to stay in business, and that's going to harm the U.S. economy. They didn't think these things through. Somebody sat around in a room at the White House and said, well, we'll crash oil prices, that'll finish off Russia. Yes, let's do it. All in favor, aye. And they didn't think it through to what it might cause elsewhere. They didn't. Very recklessly considered foreign policy. Now, we're seeing another article, this is out of srbin.info, reaffirming that Hugo Chavez was the victim of an assassination, that he may have been artificially induced to have this very aggressive cancer. And they're saying the reason he was targeted for assassination was because he wanted to free Venezuela from control of the U.S. dollar. And the first attempt at a U.S. coup against him was when he tried to sell Venezuela's oil for the yuan instead of the dollar. That's what this is all about, keeping the world enslaved to the U.S. paper Federal Reserve note. And for that, they're willing to risk the incineration of the surface of our planet. Because when you are a money junkie, when you're addicted to money, how much you have right now doesn't matter. You don't get a thrill off of that. It's getting more, having more come in. That's what triggers that pleasure response. And because it is an addiction, there is no amount of money that will ever satisfy them at all. They always have to have more. It's time to recognize that money addiction is a real, serious psychological problem. It's the only addiction not listed in that psychological diagnostic manual that declares healthy eating is a mental illness called orthorexia nervosa. But they don't dare declare the money junkie behavior. You know, even though they could prescribe a pill for that and get a lot of money. We must worship the bankers and the money junkies. They are the true rulers of the world. They are gods incarnate among us. The real economy for the rest of us is in recession mode. Trucking and rail traffic continue their decline. The smart money has been getting out of the stock market for the last 16 weeks. Soros has sold off $3.5 billion in U.S. stocks. He's putting his money into physical gold. He knows what's coming, and so should you. You should get all of your money out of the bank that you don't need to cover your current checks. You should be getting into physical silver and gold. Small amounts so there's no record. Because you just know at some point the government is going to say, well, you're going to have to turn in your silver and gold. We have to save the banks because banks are more important than the American people. And they did it before in 1933. So don't write in and say, that's ridiculous. They would never do that. They've done it before. Because always the money must be protected. The banks must be protected. No matter how many people die of starvation, no matter how many people are killed in cripple of war, we have to protect the bankers and their most holy ink and paper. And banking is a religion. It's not a science. It's an arbitrary set of rules that makes the priesthood, meaning the bankers, richer at your expense. And it only works as long as you believe this is the way the world is supposed to be. We'll be back after these few words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, Vladimir Putin has come on out and said, basically, Washington, D.C., meaning the Federal Reserve, it's just a printing machine of fiat money. It's not backed by anything. It's not backed by silver. It's not backed by gold. Technically, it's backed by the future slave labor of the American people. Because that's what a Treasury bond is. The Treasury Department prints up a bond, sends it over to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve prints up ink and paper or numbers on the computer, sends it back. It's a little double shuffle to try and hide the fact that they're basically creating this money out of thin air. And those Treasury bonds represent a promise to whoever is holding them that somewhere down the road, the federal government will take money away from you without giving you back anything for it in order to make good on the debt. There is a problem. There's a Treasury bond bubble. There aren't enough living Americans, even with all the new refugees and illegal immigrants, to ever make good on all those Treasury bond notes. Which is why I know that as U.S. debt is being sold off at record levels, the only institution crazy enough to buy it is the Federal Reserve. So we're basically looking at central banks around the world selling U.S. Treasury bonds. Sales had hit a record $57 billion in January. So far this year, the global bank dump of U.S. debt has reached $123 billion. And at some point, the creation of new instant money to make good on these Treasury bonds is going to cause people still holding the Treasury bonds to refuse U.S. dollars as compensation and say, I want to be paid in something that actually has some worth. Silver, gold, or large tracts of land. Right now in the United States, as we talk about queens with million-pound jewel-encrusted hats telling us all that we have to live with austerity, here in the United States of America, corporate CEOs are earning 335 times as much money as the average employee. That is an absolutely insane out of balance. The Time Warner Cable CEO Rob Marcus just resigned or just left after just 2.5 years on the job, and he got a $92 million severance package. It's just completely out of control. Let's talk about immigration. It's also out of control. They're discovering that immigrants are trying to get into Sweden from Denmark by literally attaching themselves to the bottoms of trucks, trying to avoid ID checks, because Sweden has put the barriers back up and said you're not allowed to come in unless you've got the appropriate paperwork. And so now we've got this huge people smuggling operation going on. Apparently over in, the Lampedusa Refugee Welcome Center Tuesday night, a group of Tunisian migrants were informed they were going to be sent back to their home country, and they responded by burning the refugee center down. So tell me how that old immigrant blended Europe idea is working out. Got to take a break for our top of the hour station ID. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. I want to back up here because as we talk about holders of Treasury bonds wanting to be paid in silver and gold, a lot of people don't really know about the special deal the Federal Reserve has with the U.S. government. First of all, a couple of things you need to understand. The Federal Reserve is not part of the federal government. It is a privately owned central bank. It's no more federal than Federal Express. It pays no taxes on the money it makes off the American people. It's right there in the Federal Reserve Charter. The only taxes they pay are the real estate taxes on the ground underneath their buildings. They don't pay any other taxes. And the Federal Reserve Act stipulates that interest on the national debt is to be paid in gold to the Federal Reserve bankers. They don't accept that ink and paper stuff. They know it's worthless. They make their money in absolute gold. And when you look at the spiraling out of control debt and how much interest is being paid on it, I think maybe we're getting one idea where all that gold that had been stored at the New York Federal Reserve gold vaults on behalf of Germany and other countries may have gotten off to. The Federal Reserve doesn't want that ink and paper stuff. They know it's worthless. They want the gold. Getting on back to immigration. Up in Austria, there was an ugly, ugly incident. Apparently, these newly transplanted Muslim communities are putting out what they call the Sharia patrols to make sure everybody is in compliance with Muslim Sharia law. Even though, in this case, they're standing in Austria. And apparently one of these Sharia groups approached a man and his wife and daughter and started to verbally chastise the women, saying that they were behaving immorally, they were dressed immorally, and they should go home and cover up. And the husband stepped forward to say, look, this is our country. These are Austrian women. They don't have to follow your rules, at which point the Sharia Street Patrol beat them up, put them in the hospital. Remember what I said before, that migration and immigration, illegal immigration, are filters. You're not getting the best representatives of those source countries. You're getting the dregs. You're getting the criminals. You're getting the ones fleeing prosecution. Why is it out of control? It turns out it's a big money maker. Human smugglers profiting off the migration traffic into the EU are making an estimated $6 billion a year with a B. I wonder who's picking up that tab. Most of these migrants don't have that kind of money. Somebody's footing the bill. They're expecting a new surge in Syrian refugees up there in Michigan. Boy, are they going to be surprised when they see that snow that's still coming down. And everybody's saying, where are they going to find jobs? Where are we going to find jobs? Well, good news. President Obama is leaping to the rescue, and he's spending millions of dollars to find summer jobs, but only for the refugees. The rest of you, you're on your own. Tells you where you sort of rank in our society, doesn't it? Below the refugees and the illegal immigrants. They're getting better treatment from the government than you are. Out in California, immigrant kids have been granted state-funded health care regardless of their immigration status, which is government speak, meaning that illegal immigrant kids are now getting free medical care. And for you legal American citizens, just a reminder that next year your health insurance premiums for those Obamacare policies are going to be going up again by double digits. Obama is opening the border for 4,000 Cubans to come into the United States of America as part of his normalizing relations. The Cubans only have to go through a 60-minute security screening before being allowed on the streets of America, as opposed to legal Americans who are having to wait in line 3 hours just to get on an airplane. More about that in a little bit. There has been a second broadcast tower sabotaged in southwest Sweden. They don't know why or who's doing it. Maybe it's extortionists, or maybe it's somebody who feels that what's being broadcast doesn't comply with their religious beliefs. But it is causing a lot of problems. David Cameron, as part of his smear campaign to try and keep Great Britain enslaved to the European Central Bank, is now out there saying that ISIS wants the Brexit. ISIS is in favor of the Brexit. I rather doubt ISIS cares one way or the other, but that's Cameron's new spin. You know, ISIS is for the Brexit. You don't want to be on the same side as ISIS, do you? Huh? Well, that's why you have to join the Remain campaign, because otherwise you're siding with the terrorists. I mean, the propaganda is just getting absolutely silly. But they're desperate because this whole New World Order agenda that they're all subscribed to is starting to come apart at the seams. And they have invested billions of dollars and decades trying to create this global government. And they have botched it up pretty badly. They tried to build the need for global government on 3 pillars. A global pandemic requiring a global medical authority. That one fizzled in 2009 with the When Pigs Fly flu. Global warming requiring a global environmental authority. That one died of frostbite. And finally, the global economic crisis, which is certainly well on path, but here's the problem. We understand globalism is the cause of all this economic hardship. We're not going to be asking for more globalism as a solution. That's like being in a sinking boat and taking buckets of water from the ocean and pouring them inside. And along with the Brexit, the Frexit, the Grexit, the Drexit, now up in Finland, they're talking about a possible referendum on leaving the European Union. It is all coming apart. And all the New World Order people, they're crying, they're sad. They wanted a single global throne, and they were hoping they would get to sit on it. You know, look, we'll get you a big, gaudy gold chair like the lady with the crown. If it'll make you feel better sitting on it, doesn't mean we're going to listen to you. I mean, hardly anybody listens to the Queen of England anyway, no matter how many jewels she has in the crown. But if it'll make you feel better to call yourself ruler of the world, go on ahead. We got plenty of room left in those asylums. Meanwhile, everybody is turning their eyes to Norway, which is not in the European Union, and they are doing just fine. strong, healthy economy, good medical services to their population. Those Vikings are doing great up there. And more states of the European Union are saying they had the right idea. Now, getting on to this nonsense about the bathrooms. And they're still out there pushing this whole thing. There's an article over in 4winds10.net about how this LGBT activist is saying that this whole issue of gender ID and restrooms is part of a larger agenda of undermining the sense of a nuclear family, which sounds a little odd, but if you think about it, it fits in with my thesis that the New World Order is trying to attack our sense of identity to make us easier to control. If you don't know who you are or even what restroom to use, you're easier to push around with propaganda. All right, we're going to go ahead and grab a phone call from the Analog Anarchist up in Maine. And aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I have a local issue here, but it's federal in nature. By the way, I'm glad to have you back on Galaxy 19, so I don't have to mess with a computer to hear your show. It's great. I'm working out in the garden.
Oh, I need to get that information back from my website so people know that I'm on Galaxy 19. I haven't gotten that information yet. I'll have to nag RBN about it.
There's some kind of a treaty where you're not supposed to talk about it, even though it's free to air, and you're not supposed to advertise it.
All right, I won't mention it then. We're on Galaxy 19, people. Those of you with K-band dishes.
The day after Nakba Day, we had a visit from the director of the National Park Service. Now, we're facing a millionaire that's trying to militate for a national park, and so they couldn't get that. They changed their mind since Obama, by executive order, can create a national monument. They're kind of militating to get Obama to designate a national monument, and then they can kind of build around that. So we had the director of the National Park Service up here talking to the crowd and going on and on about how the National Park Service has no power of eminent domain unless specifically authorized by Congress. Well, technically that's true, but they haven't been able to build a national recreation area without stealing the land.
And, there's also that enclave clause that everybody seems to want to ignore, especially the Bureau of Land Management. Where, in order to prevent the government from solving its self-made economic problems by simply stealing the land of the people, the founders of this nation wrote into the Constitution a restriction. The federal government can only own the land under their own buildings and infrastructure like harbors and airports and military bases. And other than that, it's hands off. They're not allowed to do that.
Well, the Park Service would like to have us believe that all this land came from millionaires and they just gave it to them for the benefit of the people. I'm sorry, I'm one of the 12,000 evictees of the Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area. Eminent domain is how they took our land, and they paid nothing for it.
Well, my guess is there's probably something of tremendous value underneath that ground, because the real goal of all these land seizures by the Environmental Protection Agency goes back to when Richard Nixon ended gold convertibility. Because at that point, foreign governments all of a sudden realized the U.S. didn't have enough gold to redeem their paper notes, and certainly did not have enough gold to be pledging as collateral on government borrowing. So Richard Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency. You were all told it was to protect the environment, and they started grabbing huge chunks of land with mineral resources and locking them away from the American people, and that is what's been pledged on government borrowing from Nixon's administration up to the present. And right now, it's literally 1/4 of the entire nation is now pledged as collateral on the government's out-of-control debt.
I believe it.
It is.
Good talking to you.
All right, thank you very much for the phone call. Now, we were talking about this whole bathroom nonsense, what's going on out there. Itzhak Perlman, world-class violinist, has just canceled his concert in North Carolina because of their law saying that men can't use the women's room. That's just bias. I've never noticed Itzhak Perlman canceling a concert over Israel's apartheid treatment of the Palestinians. But by golly, when it comes to bathrooms, he just has to take a stand. Bizarre little article that came out of Information Liberation saying now a white person smiling at a black person is a racist microaggression. Now, this came out of this so-called Whiteness History Month at Portland College, saying that a white person smiling to a black person, it's a racist insult. Frowning at them is a racist insult. What are we supposed to do? Act like they're not there? They'll get upset about that. Susan Rice is making the rounds saying that there are really way too many white people in top government posts. You don't cure racism by being racist. They're trying to fan up racial tension. Why? It's good for the election. If they can convince the black people that all the white people are out there to get them, those blacks are going to vote for Hillary Clinton. It's just absolutely absurd. All right, now getting on to the TSA, the Tourism Suppression Agency. Apparently at Chicago's Midway Airport, the security lines are now 3 hours long. Do you realize how absurd that is? Here in Hawaii, if you're going to one of the other islands, you have to stand in a security line for 90 minutes for a plane flight that lasts half an hour. That's it. And the TSA is out there pushing their pre-check program. It's an extortion racket. I'm from the TSA, and if you don't pay me $85 protection, $85 pre-check, something bad going to happen. Like maybe you're going to miss your flight. Maybe your luggage is going to disappear. It's like the old protection racket. Now, they have already signed up 9,000 Americans for the pre-check program at a price of $85 each. That comes out to $765,000, $750,000. The money is flowing on in. If they can get 100 million Americans to sign up for pre-check, they're going to be rolling in the dough. And they love that dough. You know when you go through the security and you're told you have to put your change in those bins and you're supposed to grab the change? Well, normally people are so glad to get out of there and they're holding their belt and their smartphone and everything, they won't get all the change. And it turns out that adds up. The TSA is getting $765,000 per year in change that is left in the bins by passengers. And they're a very well-funded organization, but it's not enough. There's another theory out there about what's going on with all these long lines. Now, the TSA, it's now 15 years old. They have an annual budget of $7.6 billion and a workforce of 60,000. They had enough tax money to waste an idiotic $1.4 million for an iPad app that simply randomly points left or right. $1.4 million. Any programmer could write that for free in about half an hour. They spent $3 million on 200 useless explosive detection puffer machines that don't actually detect explosives. And the usual assortments of awards and plaques and everything to the TSA managers to make them feel like they're doing good things. I mean, the Nazis did the same thing with their soldiers. They were really big on medals and decorations to remind you that, yes, what you're doing is a good thing. Now, apparently what's going on is the TSA workforce was unionized under the Obama administration. And apparently they are staging slowdowns at major airports, trying to get hefty pay increases. And that's a big part of what they're doing and why the lines are so long. And I would like to remind everybody that the TSA, in its 15-year history, has traumatized a lot of children. They've helped themselves to a lot of portable electronic devices. They dropped and smashed a very expensive laptop of mine for which I did not even receive an apology, let alone a replacement. And in all of that, they have never actually caught a single real terrorist. Meanwhile, every once in a while, the Department of Homeland Security will send fake terrorists through just to test TSA, and 95% of the time they get through. So, Getting on over to gun rights, Judge Napolitano was out there talking about how Bloomberg is ramping up for gun control fight. Chelsea Clinton is openly out there saying that Hillary wants to limit guns to law-abiding citizens in America. This from the woman who was giving military weapons to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. Now, there's a little bit of good news. Over in Washington, D.C., a federal judge has issued an order to the police that they are no longer allowed to ask people to justify why they want a permit to carry firearms in the nation's capital. Judge Richard Leon said that, look, the licensing screening is sufficient to, the gun background check is sufficient. And the police do not have a constitutional right to ask you why you want a gun and potentially refuse the permit based on that. Why do we want a gun? Well, because we've got all these illegal immigrants and all these drug criminals from Mexico armed by Fast and Furious running around the place. We have the police killing more innocent Americans than the terrorists. I think we all should have guns and body armor. Could save a lot of lives that way. Michigan has passed a Firearms Freedom Act that specifically nullifies federal gun law and the United Nations. They're going back to the Second Amendment, and I hope more states follow suit. We're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be back after these words, more about guns and bad police and all this other nonsense. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And apparently back in 2011, there was a police officer, Jason Stockley, who shot a guy 5 times and was even caught on the dash cam saying, I'm just going to kill this guy, was pulled over after a high-speed chase. And no charges were pressed because it turned out there was a gun in the victim's car, which we know police like to use drop guns. They'll get a gun they've confiscated from somebody, it's untraceable, and when they shoot somebody, they plant the gun and say, oh, I was afraid for my life. It turns out that little stunt may not work anymore because apparently somebody did a DNA test on the gun found in the victim's car, and they found the police officer's DNA on the gun and only the police officer's DNA on the gun, and he's now been charged with first-degree murder. Good. It's time to start reining in these out-of-control, Israeli-trained, brain-melted on antidepressant police officers. And it's almost like they've reached the stage where they think it's okay to do what they're doing, that they're always going to get away with it. Up in Chicago, which already has this vile reputation, there was an officer, Clausel Gauss, was charged with official misconduct yesterday because he had this detainee that was under control, handcuffed, and on 2 different video cameras in front of witnesses, he just walked this guy into a room, slammed him against the wall, and then just knocked him to the ground, fist to the face. And apparently thought this was perfectly acceptable behavior. And it is time to get this under control. Over in Virginia, major lawsuit. A mentally disabled Virginia man was arrested for stealing $5 worth of snacks from a convenience store, was put into jail and ignored, wasn't fed, no water, and basically starved to death in prison over $5 worth of snacks. Major lawsuit. I hope they win. And it's time to make these officers and prison guards personally, financially liable and stop this idiocy of making the taxpayers pay for the crimes of people in government. Now let's talk a little bit about computers. The banking industry is up in arms. There have been several major attacks and denial of service attacks against major banks around the world, and they're out there saying hackers can too easily attack the global financial system. Wasn't this what the NSA was supposed to be protecting us against? We have all these cybercrime divisions at the FBI and all the rest of it, and they can't seem to do a gosh darn thing about it. So one of 2 things. Either we're being set up for a false flag virtual 9/11, or all these NSA and FBI computer experts really aren't worth the money being spent on them. the FBI has now admitted that they have been spying on Americans' computers for at least 20 years, which is not a surprise. We know that this has been going on, complete violation of the Fourth Amendment, all the way back to the Echelon program of the 1980s. They've been doing this. Most people didn't know it. Now we are. There's a lawsuit going on over in Great Britain, a class action suit against government spying on them, and the court has basically blocked it by saying, well, you're going to have to prove that you were being spied on. And so the plaintiff said, all right, we need the records from the spy agency. And the court said, no, those are classified. You can't have those. So catch-22, and you can't sue the government no matter what we do. Over in France, the Union of Jewish French Students is suing Twitter for $50 million again because somebody posted an anti-Semitic hashtag. And the UEJF demanded Twitter reveal the identities of everyone who used the hashtag. I have a solution. Twitter ought to just cut France off the network completely. It's more trouble than it's worth. They've gone totally into dictatorship, totally under Israeli control. Not worth the whining. Just cut the wire, let them go their own way. Meanwhile, up at the Cannes Film Festival, there's another Jewish group that is trying to shut down a movie, Munich, a Palestinian Story by director Nasri Hajjaj, who has looked at the Munich massacre and the evidence that it was actually the German police who killed those athletes at the 1972 Olympics. And the Jews are whining, no, 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 it's got to be the Palestinians. You've got to make the Palestinians look bad. Ban the movie, ban Vaxxed, ban all of this stuff. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, there was a big stink not too long ago where it turned out Facebook was basically rigging their trending stories. They weren't actually going on out and finding what was really trending among the Facebook users. They were simply going to pre-approved news sources like CNN and picking stories and saying, this is what's trending. And it may not have been trending at all. They're just trying to force-feed you corporate media propaganda. And they were accused of censoring conservative media because they were basically picking the stories only from the liberal media. And it kicked up a big fuss, and Facebook is denying it and saying, no, no, we want to work with the GOP. And now people have been taking a very close look at Facebook and discovering Facebook isn't just censoring conservative media. They're censoring individuals, anybody who is not on board with the liberal agenda, which I presume includes yours truly. So, anyway. Now then. Still getting emails about people whose machines are succumbing to Windows 10. If you have not taken steps to prevent it from installing, you may be in for an ugly surprise because it's now being installed as a mandatory update and you have to take explicit steps to prevent it from happening. Factor people are not really looking at is how much this is costing America in terms of lost productivity. Instead of working on my computer to do something that can make money, people are spending an hour figuring out how to block this annoying update. And that is money that is not profitable. It's time that's not profitable. It's lost productivity. It's reducing our gross domestic product. Along with the fact that people may find their systems are broken under Windows 10. That certainly was the case with Claire's Choir laptop. It was absolutely unusable. It kept deleting her music files. It was just an absolute disaster. Now, there is supposedly under the control panel, under the system, there's a little button to restore your previous operating system. It lasts 30 days if you got the free update. I don't know if you're buying the Windows 10, which you're going to have to do after July 29th, probably will not have the rollback. But the free upgrade has the rollback button. It's only active for 30 days. After that, the button goes away, and your previous OS files are deleted to free up space on the hard drive. It is, sadly, not a perfect rollback. And Claire's Choir laptop has been in sort of hiccuping ever since we rolled it back to Windows 7 from Windows 10. Complete disaster. As soon as I can find a new physical machine, this one is going in the trash, or I'll set fire to it and dance around the blaze and the smoke and the rest of it. Now, a little bit of good news. This is coming out of ValueWalk.com. Apparently, there is now a class action lawsuit being pursued against Microsoft by Windows 10 users who have suffered financial harm, loss of time, loss of productivity by these mandatory updates. And there are a wide variety of laws that come into play, and that end-user license agreement does not indemnify Microsoft from monopolistic practices, restraint of trade by even by their own operating systems. They have caused immense financial harm. And if you ever read that end-user license agreement, Microsoft's attitude is, look, we have control of you, we have control of the machine, the operating system, you don't get to say anything about it, here's what's going to happen. It's time to put that end-user license agreement to a test, and this may be it. And I wish these people luck, and yes, Microsoft has got a lot of lawyers and they got a lot of money, but public sentiment is very much against Microsoft at this. And I know a lot of people who are spending the extra money to get onto Macintosh. I have a very good friend of mine who just moved from a Windows machine to Mac, and she hated having to spend the money, but she said she just got sick and tired of all this Microsoft dictatorship nonsense. People are going to Linux. John in Barbados is running on a Linux system now. Now that I'm not doing animation and visual effects anymore, I'm probably going to go with Linux when this box dies. Actually, I have Linux on it. I just haven't used it all that much. But it really is time to remind corporate America, the customer is always right. If you want to be in business, you will sell us what we want to buy. You will not jam it down our throat and expect us to like it in any way, shape, or form. Mostly because Windows 10 is not an improvement. It's a repackaging of Windows 8. They took a little bit of Windows 7, Windows 8, they spliced it together, said this is the new improved Windows 10, loaded it up with spyware. Windows 10 is just using huge amounts of the resources on the machine. So I hope this class action suit moves forward. I certainly will join in with it. I encourage you to do the same. Now, Edward Snowden has weighed in on the CIA's claim that they accidentally destroyed their copy of the torture report from the Senate, the full report. It was an accident. And Snowden is stating what we already know. When the CIA destroys something, it is never a mistake. They wanted it to go away because there are prosecutable war crimes in there. For the people who did the torture, the psychologists who assisted, the politicians who authorized it. If the U.S. moves forward with this war, and they lose, as I think they will, there's going to be a new Nuremberg, and it's going to be U.S. leaders, members of Congress, presidents, standing in the dock looking at death sentences for what has been done in our name. Okay, if you are in the high country of Oregon, better get out that snow gear again. Snow levels are going to drop as low as 4,000 feet. They're predicting 3 inches of snow in Santiam and Willamette Passes and in the government camp area. If you are a wine lover, especially around Minnesota and Wisconsin, bad news. The recent cold snap has ruined large swaths of the grapes. Now, there actually was, a while ago, a store here in Hawaii that was selling what was called ice wine, which was wine made from grapes that had been frozen. And it wasn't particularly good, which is why they're not in business anymore. Oklahoma City just tied their all-time cold record temperature. They matched the lowest ever recorded temperature, was actually yesterday, Tuesday. Same thing over in Madison, Wisconsin. Tied the lowest ever cold temperature for that date. Same thing for several cities in North Carolina. And meanwhile, just like we saw with that National Geographic article next year, we've got this story coming out of the Daily Bell about why people don't believe in science. Why aren't you listening to the scientists who are telling you that humans are warming the planet and you've got to pay a carbon tax? Why won't you believe us? It's coming out of Bloomberg. Why don't you believe science? You're not supposed to believe in science. That's what separates science from religion and politics. Scientific method and reproducibility. There's no place for belief in science at all. When somebody wants you to believe in science, it's because they've hijacked the science to sell you something. Like human-caused global warming. And the carbon Nazis are getting desperate out there over at realclearenergy.org. Apparently, the carbon Nazis are going back to this idea that they should use the RICO statutes to go after anybody questioning the orthodoxy of human-caused global warming. That's going to be a little bit difficult. RICO stands for Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Nobody's paying me for my opinion on global warming. I'm looking at the raw data and deciding for myself. I'm looking at the leaked emails and computer code from the Hadley Climate Research Unit. I'm looking at the headlines from 2000 saying snowfalls are a thing of the past. I'm looking at the snow that is still falling across the American Midwest 1 month before the official start of summer. But they don't want us thinking for ourselves. They want us to believe the scientists. What's going on here is that rulers have always looked to some kind of mid-level authority figure to convince you to go along with what the rulers want. In ancient times, it was the priests. The rulers were buddy-buddy with the church, and the church would stand up there in that funny-looking robe and the bells and the smoke and the candles and say, God says you must go to war. Well, we tend not to listen so much to the clergy in this day and age, especially after all the child molestation. And so the rulers have switched over to scientists. They've replaced the priest's robes with a white laboratory coat. And they put the guy in the white laboratory coat out there saying, you will believe humans are warming the planet and you must pay carbon taxes. Forgetting that science has never been a belief system. It's not supposed to be. There's no room for belief in science. Now, you remember Al Gore? He's the guy who started this whole thing running. Well, actually, Margaret Mead started it back in 1975, but Al Gore hopped on board in a big way in the 1990s, came out with his mockumentary, The Inconvenient Truth, with all these dire predictions of what was going to happen, none of which has come to pass, completely discredited. But he is poised to now become the world's first carbon billionaire, which is what he said he was going to do. He left the 2000 campaign virtually broke. And he hopped on board global warming and he said, I'm going to be the world's first carbon billionaire. He set up a carbon trading scheme with the assistance of Enron's Ken Lay to do to planet Earth with carbon dioxide what Enron had done to California with electricity. And it's worked out for Al Gore. His net worth is about to cross over the $1 billion mark, all on the basis of carbon trading and carbon credits and the rest of this global warming nonsense. And it's all a giant fraud. And, of course, everybody who's signed on to global warming, they're desperate to protect their reputations. They bet their credibility on a warming world, and Mother Nature just said, the heck with you, snow, ice, hail. We're going to grab a phone call here. Tom in Florida, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good day, Mike. Yeah, you're talking about the joke of it all. Look at California with the governor of Moonbeam complaining about the water situation and global warming in California, but you got 4 million illegals or more in that state. They're flooding that state with millions of illegals. You got 150,000 gang members in L.A., and or more than the National Guard of California, I believe. And here in the meantime, you got Barry Soetoro, Hussein Obama is literally trying to turn this nation into, I don't know what it is he's going to turn it into, but they sure are going out and attacking the whites. And I want to like that, the white Christians. I want to know why they keep bringing Muslims over here. They don't want to go. Why can't they stay over in their part of the world, the Middle East?
Okay, calm down. Take a Valium. Take a couple of deep breaths, and I'll tell you what's going on. The New World Order agenda is trying to blur all of the various ethnic groups of planet Earth together into one blended mass. They're dropping the Christians, Muslims, the Swedes, the Germans, the Italians, the Maori, the whatever, into a giant blender, and they're hitting puree with the idea that this pap that pours on out is going to be easy to control and exploit. It's not working out, but that was the plan. And that's why they're flooding the U.S. with these illegal immigrants. They're trying to destroy our sense of a national, ethnic, regional, historical identity. They're even trying to attack our sense of a gender identity with all this restroom nonsense, so that we're so confused about who we are that we can't stand up to the tyrants who are going to say, all right, you go work in the fields, you work in the fish cannery, you do this and that. That's what's going on here. And Obama is trying to turn the United States of America into one of the founding segments of the coming global government.
Well, Michael, I want to say this. Barry Soetoro, Hussein Obama, must have hated his white side of his family, because he was raised by white people, but he must hate their guts, because I guess he realized who his mother was. And you had Frank Marshall Davis, and you had, which I believe is the father of Obama.
Yes.
That's what I really think is the daddy of him. And I can tell you right now, what he has done to this country, and the white people are so stupid. There was a great movie made in 1968. Have you ever seen a movie that Charlton Heston called The Planet of the Apes? That movie's coming to fruition. And that movie was made in 1968. It's called The Planet of the Apes. And if you don't believe that movie ain't coming to existence,
okay, well, wait a minute. You're crossing a line here. I mean, ultimately, we're all in one form or another. We're descended from the ape line. Anyway, thank you very much for the phone call, Tom. You're way too hyper and excited for me to deal with. You got to cut back on the coffee, really, or go decaffeinated, something like that. Now then, on to the subject of vaccines. Okay? As you know, we just had this horrible incident at Harvard University where there's been an outbreak of mumps, and it hit students who got the mumps vaccine. And the journalists, the correspondents and prostitutes of the corporate media are out there saying, well, you just get another vaccination. That'll make things better. Actually, no. If you get a vaccination for an illness while you have that illness, it can amplify the disease to the point of killing you. That may have been what happened to Prince. Now, a story coming out of healthcarepublic.info. The CDC has been forced to release documents proving they knew thimerosal causes autism. And they've been able to hide it from the public because the FDA has a cutoff on the ingredients in vaccines. If an ingredient is less than, I think it's 2% of the total volume of the vaccine, they don't have to list it anymore. And that's the problem. Now, 2 more whistleblowers have come forward on the MMR vaccine. And let's see, this is Stephen Crowling and Joan Wilczowski. They're former virologists at Merck. They're insiders, and they've leveled charges against Merck, saying that basically Merck fraudulently misled the government and omitted, concealed, and adulterated material information regarding the efficacy of its mumps vaccine in violation of the False Claims Act. In a nutshell, the FDA requires that a vaccine be 95% effective before it's approved for use. And Merck came on out and said, absolutely, it's 95% effective. And it wasn't even close. Merck has tried to block the lawsuit. The judge dismissed Merck's objections, saying that there are grounds for this case to move forward. They're not interested in selling safe, effective products. They just want the money any way they can get it. Over at naturalnews.com. Oh, we got to take a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about this story over at naturalnews.com, which has a video of interviews with doctors basically saying they really don't know anything about the vaccines they're prescribing. Their medical education doesn't teach them anything about the vaccines or what's in there. It simply says these are the current vaccines recommended for your patients. And it sort of reduces the idea of being a doctor from somebody with a broad knowledge of what is good medically or not, down to literally being sales reps for the pharmaceutical industries. So the video is entitled, Are Doctors Experts on Vaccines? The answer is a resounding no. They don't know. They're not being taught. All they know about vaccines is what they're getting from the sales handouts from the pharmaceutical companies. And they get lots of goodies for prescribing certain companies' medications. They'll get free trips to medical conferences and all kinds of other goodies like that. Now, a group of farmers in Nebraska have filed a lawsuit against Monsanto claiming that glyphosate gave them all cancer. Monsanto is trying to fight back against the World Health Organization declaration that glyphosate is probably carcinogenic, and they've got a rather strange ally in the United Nations, which claims they have reviewed Monsanto's glyphosate and determined it is not carcinogenic. This, of course, coming from the same organization that insisted humans are warming the planet, and proving that the United Nations is just as corruptible as any other governmental organization. Okay. Now, down in Colorado, back when they were talking about legalization of marijuana, called it reckless, well, Governor John Hickenlooper has had to reverse himself and said, actually, it's working out pretty good. Drug arrests are down, crime is down, reckless driving is down, and, of course, it's generating a revenue stream for the Colorado government that's working out very well. And I guess he's in a good mood. Maybe he's toking a little bit himself because he just signed a law allowing Colorado residents to start collecting rainwater on their property. Now, there's a limit, 2 55-gallon barrels, but it's certainly better than most of the rest of the country where you are forbidden by law from collecting and drinking the pure, clean water that falls from the sky for free, and you are required to pay for tap water, which is laced with lead, other people's unmetabolized pharmaceuticals, fracking fluid, and who knows what all else. And finally, the other day I was talking about this incident where somebody had been accused of witchcraft and pointing out that this kind of fanaticism among the religiously deranged is still going on. And I got a lot of nasty emails about it, and unfortunately it's happened again. Over in India's West Bengal, a 45-year-old woman was whipped to death by a lynch mob after being accused of being a witch because some of the neighbors around her fell ill in this village. We are, in fact, being driven into a new dark ages by this neo-feudalist society that's being forced on us. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I got a bunch of stuff I got to do this afternoon. We'll be back tomorrow, Thursday, here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices. Share what you know with everybody that you know. We have to outshout Hillary's $1 million troll squad and get the news out about what's going on. We're at the edge of a nuclear war, and I need you to help me to stop it. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.